marijuana cases in Ontario have been on hold, the prosecutions.
And also in Prince Edward Island and Nova Scotia now.
Yeah, well, before that, though, an interesting case that dealt more closely with the marijuana issue, or the medical marijuana issue, was a judgment that came out about a week after mine.
I recall. Yeah, tell us about that.
And that was spearheaded by Paul Burstein, lawyer Paul Burstein, and Alan Young, representing a group of medical marijuana users.
Yeah, Alice Martin, and yeah, we know the 7 of them, I think.
Yeah, and they were saying that the current regulations that were enacted by the government were still deficient in the sense that although they allowed people, in theory, to possess marijuana legally, it didn't address the issue of first source.
It's like it's legal to have morphine, but people aren't required to go grow it or buy it illegally.
Right.
So
they can get it somewhere, and the effect of the government's scheme is that although you can, if you can get your hands on it somehow, you can possess it legally. But how do you get it in the first place? And the judge said that, to require sick people, and in order to get an exemption, you have to be quite sick. In order to require those people to sort of resort to the underground to get their medicine is unconstitutional. So the regulations.
Damn right, too, actually, when you describe it simply like that, and when in contrast to every other medicine that's legally allowed, it's a very bizarre circumstance to do to people. And good decision, of course, and that no doubt helped you.
Well,
and
it helped on my appeal because it then put an end to the government's argument, say, well, the regulations, even if you accept the government's response that the regulations saved the section before it became invalid, that can only be true if the regulations themselves were effective and were constitutional. And
which they're not.
The judge says, well, no, they're not. So their legs have been taken out from under them with that additional judgment. And since then, we've had some developments in other provinces, in PEI and Nova Scotia, where provincial courts are saying, well, wait a minute, if people are now immune from prosecution in Ontario, it's an abusive process that people in these provinces are subject to prosecution.
It was great, and that's happened now in Prince Edward Island, Nova Scotia. And when's the government appeal on the January 2nd decision going to take place?
Well, the appeal's been heard, and that's where we're waiting. That was last argued on March 11th.
Would that be Ontario Supreme Court?
It was argued in the Ontario Superior Court, which is sitting as an appeal court. So the effect of which, up until now, the government's been able to say correctly that the decision in my case was one provincial court case that was not binding on any other court. That won't be the case once we get the appeal decision. The appeal decision will be binding on every trial court in Ontario, so that will effectively be the law of Ontario.
Well, hold on. That would mean that pot would really be legal then if that judge comes out and agrees with you.
Well, effectively, that's right. He will sort of he will if assuming we succeed on it, he will create the state of the law in Ontario, being that there's no prohibition on pot.
Now, my theory with judges is that the longer they take to come back with a decision, the better for us, because that means they're going to change something. They need a big, long explanation to justify.
Well, that's I think, and this particular judge is. I think recognizes the scrutiny that this is going to receive, and he probably recognizes that it's likely to be appealed to a higher court. So he's.
What is the higher court after that?
We'll go to the Ontario Court of Appeal, assuming the government appeals it. My sense is that there's almost such a momentum in the courts through the government just keeps losing, and there's such a confused state of the law as it is with all these adverse decisions the government's receiving, that from a political standpoint, at some point or another, they're just going to have to give up, and they can't keep putting cases on hold while they await further appeals. And people are entitled to have a trial within a reasonable time, and it's I don't think it'll be a tenable situation that if people are charged with possessing small amounts of pot, that the public at large is going to accept a situation where those charges are going to be held in abeyance for months or even years while these appeals play out, especially given the government's stated intention to finally introduce legislation to decriminalize.
Which will wholly be inadequate to some degree, too, because, of course, the minister, while saying he's going to lower the penalties, is also saying we're going to be more strictly enforced.
Well, that's right. And the important thing, at least in where I'm from in Windsor, where a pot conviction in Windsor is probably as severe consequences anywhere in the country. Given
Right.
Our
You've got to go to the border to work sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, we have literally thousands of people in this city that cross the border every day to go to work and travel, and so I think the other thing that has to be addressed is the Americans won't necessarily recognize if we remove the criminal sanction from pot, but continue to prosecute it as a ticketable offense.
That'll show up on people's APIC and CPIC?
Well, that's right, and so the Americans may not care at all whether it's criminally enforced or enforced by way of ticket. They may, to them, it's still a controlled drug offense, and they will continue to bar entry.
So you feel the only suitable option is legalization, where people bear no stigma at all.
That's right.
Yeah, well,
and especially given, I mean, let's face it, I think it's now pretty well accepted that pot is less harmful than alcohol or tobacco, which are legal, although regulated in this country. And I think the only debate in Canada that I really see is between legalization and decriminalization. I just don't think there's a big constituency out there advocating the continued criminal sanction on pot.
No, I've never got that perception. On May 6th, we're going to the Supreme Court. Now, actually, your cases and the Supreme Court case only dovetail in theme to some degree, but not in legal circumstances. But I've got to figure that your cases, that what you've established on January 2nd and the verdict that came after, it's going to help bolster the Supreme Court when they assess the merits of the May 6th case.